This is the first time I've ever shared this story with anybody. My buddy and I were driving outside of Chicago on a back highway, and it was rural. There was nothing but cornfields. I remember it was about 9 o'clock at night, and it just felt warm outside. We were in my LeBaron. I had the convertible top down. And as we're driving on this highway, I remember looking up in the sky and we see this bright blue metallic looking color object just hovering in the sky. And it's like following along with the vehicle. And we were just kind of freaked out because we had no idea what this was. And then I remember I looked over at my clock. It was 9:02 p.m. And it's like that was the last thing I remembered. Up until now, we're driving on the interstate. And we have gone 35 miles. And I look at the clock again, and it's exactly 12:30. And I'm starting to wonder, what happened that caused us to take 2.5 hours to drive 30 miles, because I can't remember that drive from the point where we seen this light and where we are now. And I look over at my friend, and he's just as confused as I am. And we were just kind of panicked. We were scared. And then I remember we looked over in a cornfield, and there was all these military vehicles, Humvees with big spotlights driving in these cornfields, looking up in the sky like they were looking for something. The rest of the trip, we got home, we didn't talk about it, and we remained quiet about it for a long time. Fast forward to 2010, I'm now living in Chicago. And that's when it started happening. I started seeing these, I don't know, lights, crafts, whatever they are, orbs in the sky that were metallic blue. They would pulsate, they would move around the sky. They would follow me in my vehicle. They would come outside my home. And I just remember that I would get the feeling like I was being watched, and I knew that they were outside, and I'd look out the window, and there they would be. And I remember one night being at home, and I seen them, and it just unnerved me so bad that I had to call a friend to talk to him to talk me down, because I was so terrified of seeing these objects in the sky. So I began going online and talking about what I had seen. And I had made friends with a man named Rick. Now, Rick lived in New Mexico, and he was a news reporter for a news station out in Albuquerque. And he was working on a breaking story when I remember what happened. He started to tell me, I'm onto something about these UFOs. Something could happen to me, and if it does, don't believe what they say. And I just thought, maybe he was just paranoid. And then one day I just didn't hear from Rick anymore. And several weeks passed. And then his brother happens to call me one day. He says, "Hey, I'm Rick's brother. I'm sorry to inform you that Rick has passed away." And I said, "Well, what do you mean he's passed away? What happened?" He said, "Well, Rick was found in a hotel in West Virginia. He was investigating a report down there in West Virginia. And he was found in his hotel in the bathtub, believed to have committed suicide by slitting his wrist. And I couldn't believe it. I knew Rick, he wasn't that kind of guy. It just really bothered me, upset me. So I continued to press his brother more. What happened? What was the situation? His brother said, well, we got a phone call a week later after he died. They had, without our permission, already performed an autopsy and had his body cremated because they said they couldn't contact the family when I am listed as his emergency contact in all situations. I flew down there to West Virginia. I looked at the hotel room where he had passed, and he said the room looked as if there had been a struggle, if someone had gotten into a fight. There was lamps broken and the walls were damaged, and it looked as if someone had gotten into a scuffle. He said he talked to law enforcement and the detectives about this, and they told him basically, your brother's committed suicide. You need to accept this, just move on and forget about it. And they wouldn't give him any answers, and they wouldn't pursue a investigation into what happened. They just wanted to rule it a suicide. And at the time, Rick and I had been talking about some very sensitive things. Now, Rick had told me about an underground base in Dulce, New Mexico, that he had found definitive proof. He had talked to a witness who had been there at Dulce, and he believed him 100%, and that there was humans and extraterrestrials working in this underground base, that they were doing experiments on humans and extraterrestrials from other planets, other parts of the universe, and that it had to tie into with these cattle mutilations where they found, that these parts had been removed from the cattle, and the whole point of this was that they were creating hybrids using human DNA combined with their DNA and animal DNA, and that these cryptids that we had seen, like the Mothman, were a result of hybridization and them crossbreeding DNA, and that everything we know about human existence and our own culture is completely wrong. And he had evidence, he had documents, he had paperwork that he had sent to me. And I began to get scared because I knew what happened to Rick could ultimately happen to me. And it did. It started to happen. About 2011, I start seeing these strange vehicles outside my home. And we know everybody in the neighborhood. We know that no one parks on the street. Everybody parks in the driveway. And even when they have visitors, they do not park in the driveway. So seeing this, it was like, who are these people? And they would be parked out my home at the time when I lived up in Chicago for hours at a time. And they had tinted windows. I could never see their faces. I didn't know who they were. And then they would just leave. I began receiving threatening phone calls. Just really weird things started to happen to me. I seen these same vehicles start following me. Then one day I get a call from the university that I was attending, and they said, we're sorry. There's been a huge error in our computer systems. You were never a student here at the university, and so now you forfeit all your credits, and you will be forced to pay the cost of the classes that you took because your financial aid has been revoked. And then the worst of all things happened. I went through a divorce. I became very depressed. And I just stopped talking about UFOs, and I stopped talking about these things. And things got better for me. And I feel like I've hidden these things, and I've kept them secret for a long time because I was worried about what potentially could happen, seeing as to what happened with Rick and other people who have looked into these things. And that's why I don't really like to talk about UFOs, and I don't like to get deep into UFOs.